Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning to talk about wage and hour. While everybody gets settled in here, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping details. Well, um, if you can find your chat box at the bottom of the screen, you can go ahead and test that out. Let me know where you're calling in from. And we'll be using the chat box and the question box a lot throughout this presentation. The handouts for this presentation were attached with the login invitation that was emailed out to you. If you did not receive the handouts, please let me know in the chat box and I will make sure you get a copy of those before the presentation is over. If you have any questions about the content of this presentation, that will be for our presenters. You can use the Q&A box, the question box. It has two speech bubbles at the bottom, and we will answer those as we go. Because your feedback is very important to us, please complete the survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. It shouldn't take more than a minute to complete, and it provides us with valuable feedback that we use to constantly improve our webinars. Your speakers today are Miss Mary Bradford and Miss Jessica Hawthorne. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to them.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and welcome, everyone. Glad to have you with us today. My name is Mary Bradford. I'm one of the HR advisors here at CEA, and I will be doing the training for the first half, and then Jessica will be taking over midpoint. But as I go through today, please feel free to put any of your questions into the Q&A box, and she will be happy to answer them while I'm chatting, and then we will switch for the second half. All right, well, let me first of all start off by saying thank you so much to Alameda County Workforce Development Board for sponsoring today's webinar, but also for providing all of you with an amazing HR hotline benefit. So you are able to call CEA, the California Employers Association, Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, ask any sort of wage and hour, HR, leave of absence, policy question that you might have, and we are happy to help you. And that is a no-cost HR hotline, so there is not a fee for you to utilize that hotline. And you do have your own number, which is 888-202-5668. So please give us a call anytime you have questions. We are more than happy to help you. Now, as you go through the presentation today, you're going to see our main number on the bottom of all the slides, but we do ask that you call the Alameda County Workforce Development Board hotline directly so we know where you are coming from. All right, well, I just mentioned that you'll be calling in to talk to CEA. Which might be me. I'm one of the HR advisors. We have an amazing team that can assist you. And our job, if you're not familiar with CEA, is to make your life easier. And we want to bring peace of mind to you, which is why our motto is worry-free in 23 for this year, because we're trying to make life a little easier for you. We know it is pretty difficult and challenging, and there's a lot going on, and we're here to help you in the HR realm. So if you have those HR questions, you can give the hotline a call. But if you find that you maybe need a little more assistance, we do have individual memberships where we can help you do a customized handbook. We can also help you with investigations. We can do customized training. So just let us know if we can help you. Give us a call anytime you have those questions. We also encourage you to visit our website, which is employers.org. You can access our blog, our newsletter, all of the great resources that we have out there. Now, we do have a lot of information on our website that is kind of behind a member wall. So if you're interested in having full access to our website, Jessica at the end is going to tell you a little more about membership options that you have, but we encourage you to take a look at our website. There's a lot of great info out there for you. And then my last little disclosure before we jump in today's information is I do want you to keep in mind that CEA is not a law firm. And when you call us, we're not giving you legal advice. So we are giving you information, we're giving you best practices, we're giving you options. Ultimately, all the decisions you make are up to you, and we encourage you to always consult with counsel if you ever have a matter of legal significance to get a legal opinion on things. Okay, let's jump into today's topics. We are going to be talking all about the fundamentals of wage and hour and why it's so very, very important that you follow the wage and hour guidelines here in California. We're going to talk about the ever-changing and always confusing minimum wages and exempt classifications in California. We are all the way at the end of April, but in January 1st, we had a couple of big minimum wage changes statewide. And then, of course, our main state minimum wage change, but then we also have lots of cities that have their own minimum wages, as you are well aware, in Alameda County. And then we're going to talk about expense reimbursements. We're going to cover really one of the key fundamentals, meal and rest breaks. and how important it is to follow those, and also what it means to pay premium pay if those are not followed. And then we're going to talk about those final pay guidelines and why it's just essential that you pay your employees promptly and correctly when your employment relationship comes to an end. But let's just start, first of all, and kind of give you a little background where all of this information comes from. Because you might be thinking, where does this info come from? Are these just laws? Are they just made up? It's always confusing, but I can assure you they come from a couple of different sources that can give you really good guidance on how things should work in California. So there's something known as the California Labor Code. There are also California wage orders, and then we have local ordinances, and then we have case law. So all of these things go into determining where we get our guidance and where our employment decisions are made. So a couple of things I want to focus on. California wage order. There are 17 different wage orders in California. Those are normally based on the industry that you're in. But one of the requirements in California is that you do post your wage order in the workplace along with your California and federal labor law posters. So take a look when you get a chance at the workplace. Make sure you've got your wage order posted next to your poster. It should be in an accessible location. That's normally a break room, someplace where employees come in, even if they just come in a couple times a year, but you want to have that wage order posted for everybody to see. And then, of course, we have local ordinances. And keep in mind, in California, when something is to the better benefit of an employee, that's going to trump anything else that the state might have going on. So if you are in a city or county that has a higher minimum wage, then we always pay that minimum wage if it's higher than the state minimum wage. So we want to make sure we're always checking where our employees are working, so we make sure that we're paying that minimum wage and giving them any associated benefits they should have. And then, of course, there's case law. A lot of times California regulations are a little confusing. Maybe they're a little unclear, or sometimes they even contradict each other. So then we could have case law that comes along where that can be a site where we can say, all right, well, in this particular case, which we'll be citing a couple today, the courts determined that this is the action employers should take. And that's how we kind of get some more clarification on how we're supposed to do all these things and run our business and keep it safe. So let's start out with some of the basics and really talk about what it means to be an employee or to have an employee in California. Now, an employee is anyone that is helping out your business, and anything that they do, you are benefiting, or your business is benefiting from them being there. Now, this can include minors, if you ever have minors that work for you, as well as undocumented workers. Now, employees in California, though, are not independent contractors or interns. Those are not really employees, but interns, you have to be careful, because that means that is somebody who is an intern who is getting school credit, and they are getting some sort of benefit to them for working for you. Remember, we don't want to have unpaid interns in California. They need to either be receiving school credit or they need to be on your payroll as an employee. Now, remember, in California, everyone really defaults to being a non-exempt employee unless you as the employer can prove differently. And when I say non-exempt, I mean an hourly employee. So somebody who's on the clock, you're paying them for all of their time. Now, sometimes employers get tempted to call everybody or a lot of people independent contractors. And for several years, employers were kind of okay getting away with calling people independent contractors. There was still some checking on this, and it was questioned at times. But normally, if you could prove that someone was an independent contractor and you just gave them a 1099, you were normally safe. Well, in the past couple of years, that has really changed. And there is now something known as the ABC test, which was Assembly Bill 5. And this test said, this presumes that all workers are automatically employees unless, and again, this is unless you as the employer can prove that they are not and that there's something different. So when it comes to being an independent contractor, the ABC test says that employees must meet these independent contractors must meet these three requirements in order to be properly classified. So they need to be free from control and direction of the hirer, you as the hiring entity. They need to perform work that is outside the usual course of what your business does. And they need to be engaged in this trade, doing this kind of work for other people, or they have their own business where they're doing this work and they farm it out to other businesses. Now, the thing you have to keep in mind when it comes to independent contractors, though, there are all sorts of exemptions. There has been a lot of lobbying that's been done where certain groups have been excluded, and it's become very, very confusing and it keeps changing. So what we always advise, if you want to classify someone as an independent contractor, you definitely want to consult with legal counsel because you want them to draft an independent contractor agreement for you. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable that that person truly is an independent contractor. So be very cautious with this, because remember, in California, it's always going to default to an individual is an employee unless you prove differently, and you want to make sure you do your due diligence on that. So let's talk about the breakdown of what an employee is. So I've already mentioned before a non-exempt or an hourly employee, but we also have exempt employees or salaried employees. So when it comes to an exempt employee, that means they are exempt from most of those wage and hour laws. So they don't have to take those rest breaks or meal breaks. They don't have to be paid overtime. A lot of those things come into play with an exempt employee. Now, a non-exempt employee is hourly, which means they are not exempt from wage and hour laws. And again, we default to everyone being a non-exempt hourly employee. Remember, you don't want to arbitrarily classify somebody as exempt because you want to say, oh, I don't want to pay overtime. I don't want to worry about breaks. I'm just going to call you an exempt employee and pay you a flat salary. You can't do that in California. You have to be able to show that that individual is truly exempt. And let me show you what that looks like. So in order for an exempt employee to be exempt, that means they have to pass a duties as well as a salary test. And I'll show you what those numbers are here in just a little bit. But an exempt employee just receives a flat salary because they are bringing a particular skill to their job. They have experience, they have a lot of independent discretion and judgment. And so they just receive a flat salary regardless of how many hours they work. So as I said before, overtime, meal and rest breaks, that doesn't apply. There are fewer compliance issues when it comes to exempt employees. Now let's take a look at non-exempt or hourly employees. They are paid by the hour for work performed. Really, they're paid every minute that they're working for you. Those overtime laws apply. They must receive their meal and rest periods. And we need to make sure we have very good record keeping when it comes to our non-exempt employees. So that means we are going to clock in when they start their day, then they clock out for lunch, they clock back in from lunch, and then they clock out at the end of the day. Now let's take a look at some of those exempt categories. Three main exempt categories, although there are a couple of other ones, but these are the ones that most businesses have to deal with. So you've got that executive branch, or executive managerial category. So their primary duty is managing 2 or more employees, part of a unit, part of a business or a division or a department, something along those lines. Then we have administrative, and they work directly with management to work on policies. This is a very high level employee that's working on operations. They're designing policies. They are in charge of things, making sure things are happening. And then we have the professional exemption. So they're in a field of science or learning. This could be teachers, for examples, or dentists fall into this professional exemption as well. So they have an advanced degree or they have a particular license for this area. Now, when it comes to this exempt duties test, that means they need to be spending 51% or more of their time really kind of on white collar duties. That means they have a lot of independent discretion, they have judgment, you're not micromanaging these people, you're not watching everything that they're doing. The thing you have to look out for, and this is where employers get in trouble, is they will go by titles and they will say, oh, they're an office manager, or they're a shift manager, or a shift lead. They must be automatically exempt. And that's not really how it works. You really have to look at their duties and their responsibilities to find out if they should truly be classified as an exempt employee. We do have worksheets on our website, and that is something that we always recommend you do for every position that you classify as exempt to make sure that they are truly an exempt employee. So let's take a look at our minimum wage and our salary requirements. So right now in California, statewide, the minimum wage is $15.50 per hour. Now, it was supposed to go up to $15, but due to inflation, there's language in the law that says if inflation is over 7%, then minimum wage gets bumped up a little bit. So it was supposed to be 15, but that's why it's now $15.50 per hour. Now, the reason we always want to pay attention to the state minimum wage is because that affects our salary requirements when it comes to our exempt employees. So what you do is you take the state minimum wage, you multiply it by 2, and then you multiply it by 2080, and that will give you what the exempt salary needs to be. So for 2023, all exempt employees must make a minimum of $64,480 per year, and that is just their base salary. Now, you might have employees that you have incorrectly categorized as exempt, and you realize, wow, they only make $50,000. I've been calling them exempt. I need to switch them. Yes, you do. Or you need to bump them up to the salary requirements and, of course, make sure that they meet the duties requirements. But if you find that you are misclassifying someone, this is a good time you might want to consult with counsel, because there's a good chance you're going to owe them some money for meal and rest periods or overtime they may not have received. And we do actually have a fact sheet, or kind of a tip sheet, on how you can work on transitioning an employee from exempt to non-exempt. A lot of businesses have had to do this over the past year, and it's just been a change that a lot of people have been going through because the exempt salary went up so much, especially for smaller employers. It was a really big jump. So a lot of companies have had to make that change. So don't feel that you're alone if you have to change anyone from exempt to non-exempt. Lots of businesses have had to do it. You just want to make sure you're doing it the right way. Now, when it comes to local minimum wages, the Bay Area is notorious for having their own minimum wage, and in a lot of different cities, as well as Los Angeles. So that's primarily where a lot of these local minimum wages are based, Bay Area and Southern California. And there's about 40 cities that are doing their own local minimum wage. Now, some of them also have their own paid sick leave requirements. So that's something you would want to take a look at. Specifically, Oakland has their own paid sick leave requirement benefit. There's also some special scheduling requirements that might be in place, as well as flex time. So you really want to make sure we always are clear on where our employees are working, especially if you have remote employees. But we want to take a look at what laws apply to employees in each city or county that they might be working at. So we have a really nice fact sheet that we put together. On the bottom of slide 15, you can see that bit.ly. A bit.ly is just a short way to get to a very long website location. And you can type that into your browser, and that will bring up the local minimum wage as well as a paid sick leave summary. Really nice and handy. It's good for you to reference. We always recommend you take a look at it a couple times during the year, because minimum wage goes up in January, but oftentimes cities will also increase minimum wage in July. It's going to be July 1st before we know it. So you want to make sure you're always paying the appropriate minimum wage for wherever your employees are working. Now, as I mentioned before, there were a couple of other exemption categories that are out there. So specifically, there are two for physicians and surgeons, as well as computer software professionals. So physicians need to be making at least $97.99 per hour in order to be classified as exempt. If they're under that, then they are considered non-exempt. And also for computer software professionals, this might surprise you, but in order to be exempt, they need to be paid an hourly rate equivalent of $53.80, which comes out to over $112,000 per year. So sometimes a lot of businesses have made the mistake of classifying an IT tech, for example, as exempt, and maybe they're paying them $70,000 or $80,000 to be an IT tech. Probably not going to meet that exemption category. They might meet the salary, but as a computer software professional, they wouldn't meet the requirements for that position. So you want to take a look at that and be careful. Again, don't get caught up in titles or anything along those lines. You really want to look at the responsibilities that those employees have and make sure that they are classified correctly. So let's talk a little bit about business expense reimbursements. There's been a lot of confusion about this, especially when people were working from home. If they were working during COVID, or maybe your business just downside and you said, you know what, everybody, we're going to work from home a couple of days and then we're going to be in the office a couple of days. But what you have to remember is anytime an employee is incurring cost on behalf of the business, you need to reimburse your employees for that. And that falls under something called Labor Section Code 2802, if you want to look that up. But the good news is here, you as an employer can limit employees to reimbursement of reasonable cost. So maybe that is they're working from home. You're going to reimburse a portion of their internet. Maybe you're going to reimburse a portion of their mobile phone if they're using that for business use. Maybe you're giving them an amount for utilities or home expenses, something along those lines. You want to come up, though, with a reasonable amount and have a discussion with your employee and make sure that you're applying this consistently. Now, keep in mind, this does apply to exempt employees and non-exempt employees. So you can't say, oh, you're an exempt employee, we pay you more anyway, so we're not going to give you this expense reimbursement. You still need to pay them an expense reimbursement if they are incurring cost on behalf of the business. Now, when it comes to mobile phones or people using their personal phones for work phones, which is very common these days, you do need to reimburse your employees for that. So if you, for example, require your employees to clock in on an app, or you require your employees to use their personal phone to access their work email, then you need to make sure that you are reimbursing a cost. Now, even if employees have an unlimited data plan and you say, well, it's for free anyway, the state has said you still need to make sure you're reimbursing a reasonable percentage. So what is a reasonable percentage? It is not clearly defined by the state, but if you think about if people are only working a third of the month, reimbursing a third of their cell phone bill might be reasonable. It might be a little less if they're not really accessing the phone that frequently. So those are all the things that you want to take a look at. You can ask your employee to provide a copy of their bills. It seems that most bills these days, $50 to $60 for a monthly cell phone bill, depending on the plan, but there are a lot of really reasonable plans out there. It's not the old days when it used to be $100 plus or $150 to have a cell phone. Then you want to determine what percentage is work related, and then you want to come up with a written agreement. We always advise that you put something in writing, especially when it comes to reimbursement, so everybody's very clear on what the policy is, and then you can determine what sort of documentation you might ask the employee to provide. And then you want to say to the employee, please let us know if you feel this reimbursement isn't fair, if something changes, so you can just make sure that everybody feels that it's an equitable situation. And again, that's just kind of a good reminder too. You need to check in on your policies and what you're doing every 6 months, every year, just to make sure it really still applies and make sure that it's something that's good for the employee as well as the business. Now, when it comes to personal vehicles, this is something that I think has come into play more too, as people have been kind of multitasking and maybe they're running more errands for the business. Maybe you're sending an employee out, maybe they're a salesperson, so they're using their personal vehicle for, again, a business related expense. So you do need to reimburse the cost again that an employee incurs on behalf of driving for you. Now, every year the IRS sets what's known as their mileage reimbursement rate. For 2023, it's 65.5 cents per mile. So that means you want your employees to track their mileage when they're doing business or doing work on behalf of the business. So if you send an employee out to the bank and to go pick Starbucks up for everybody and to go run and get lunch. So you're looking at maybe an employee is doing 20 miles round trip. So you want them to get that down on an expense reimbursement, mileage reimbursement, however you do it. And then you're going to reimburse them for that 20 miles. Now, you're not required to reimburse the IRS mileage rate. We always recommend that you do, because when you reimburse that rate, that is what the IRS says covers gas, covers insurance, covers wear and tear on the vehicle. If you reimburse less than that, the employee could have a claim that you need to pay for some extra repairs, repay for a flat tire. It could be anything. So that's why we always do advise that you reimburse at that IRS rate. It's much clearer. And for 65.5 cents a mile, you are pretty much off the hook if anything happens to that employee's car. So again, we also make sure we reimburse non-exempt and exempt employees. Every employee has the same reimbursement rights when it comes to that. And of course, if your employees are non-exempt, that means they're on the clock. So anytime that they are performing any work for you, if they are out picking something up, if they are going to meet a customer, whatever it is, they are on the clock. So be very careful with that. Now, when it comes to business losses, damaged property, we had kind of seemed like we went through a little phase where employees were not being as responsible with maybe some of the equipment that had been issued to them. Remember, we can't make any deductions due to an employee's simple negligence, when it is an accident, maybe if they, or for example, if you issued uniforms and your employees have had to ask for a couple of t-shirts because they become stained, or there was some damage done to them, or maybe they accidentally dropped their phone and the screen got cracked and it's a work phone, and so they need to get reimbursement for that, a phone that you've issued to them. So we can't charge our employees or make them pay for those things if they're using company property and it gets damaged by accident. So you have to kind of look at this as one of those cost of doing business things that you as an employer have to cover. But you might have a different situation if you can show willful dishonest acts or gross negligence. But remember, the burden would always be on you to prove that somebody had intentionally damaged your equipment or intentionally done something to ruin a piece of a laptop or something like that. So be very cautious with that. We never want to take any deductions out of our employees' paycheck or make them pay for anything if it's ever in question, if it's really their responsibility or not. That's a good time to give the hotline a call, or of course you can always consult with your own attorney on those issues. So let's talk a little bit about some remote and hybrid work examples. So here's a question for you. My employee is permitted to come to the office at any time, but is choosing to work remotely voluntarily. Do I need to reimburse their home office expenses? So option A, yes, all costs must be reimbursed. Option B, I only need to provide them a laptop and a phone. Or option C, since it's voluntary, I don't need to reimburse anything. Well, unfortunately, we don't have a crystal clear answer on this, but we feel that best practice is to establish a remote policy, a remote agreement that both you and the employer are going to sign, where you agree to how much you're going to reimburse. So is it a certain amount because they're working there full-time? Is it a partial amount because you do have a hybrid situation? You just want to come up with an agreement. Again, it's just like the cell phone reimbursement. It's like your travel policy. You just want to have these policies down and written, and both parties sign off. So again, you can show consistency. You can show that everybody is on the same page. And then if an issue comes up, you've got that documentation to back it up. But then also, if you need to make a change, maybe you need to increase your cell phone reimbursement, you can look back at what you've done and then make a decision on what the new reimbursement rate is going to be. Now, when it comes to requiring or encouraging remote work, so if you require remote or hybrid work, then you need to cover at least some of those basic work from home costs, such as the internet, office equipment. Maybe that's a laptop, maybe that's a printer if they're required to print up things, and likely some utilities. But again, you can determine that reasonable percentage of the total cost that you're going to reimburse to your employees. And so maybe you take a look at doing a monthly stipend and you say, okay, we believe this monthly stipend will cover your internet cost, your mobile your mobile phone, and your partial utilities for the office space that you're using at home. And that's sometimes a good way to just come up with a flat monthly stipend. So take a look at a couple of options. Again, you can give us a call on the hotline if you have questions. We're happy to kind of work through some pros and cons for you there. All right, so a couple of takeaways for you here. We always encourage you, again, check with your county and your city for those local minimum wage laws. You want to make sure you've got those remote work agreements so you can talk about what does it really mean to be a remote worker, how many days a week, what is your primary work location, what is your reimbursement, all of those things. You want to take a look at that, make sure, again, you've got that down in writing so everyone is on the same page. And of course, we need to comply with 2023 and get ready for 2024. As a reminder, the minimum wage will probably continue to go up. So if you just had to bring your exempt employees up to our new 64,480, and you know it's going to go up again next January, and you think, gosh, I don't think we're going to have it in the budget to bring someone up to a higher level or take them up to 65 or 68,000, whatever it might be. This might be a good time for you to start making a plan that maybe we need to transition those employees back to non-exempt employees. Or maybe you're just finding it's easier to manage your employees' time if they are non-exempt. Remember, you can always make an employee a non-exempt hourly employee. Sometimes employees get a little upset about it. They feel it's a demotion or they're being downgraded in some way. So really what you want to do is you just make sure you communicate with them why it's being done and really some of the advantages that they might have, because then all of a sudden you're looking at making sure people get rest breaks and meal breaks, and there might be some overtime for them. So there are a lot of things to take a look at, but if you're having a hard time managing employees' time, or if you're worried about getting to that salary level that it might go to January 2024, then this is a great time. Take some time over the next couple of months and figure out really what your long-term plan going to be for all of your employees. All right, well, let's start talking about overtime because this is an issue I know many of you are dealing with every single day for your employees, managing overtime, making sure it's people are clocking in and out for it appropriately, making sure it's being paid appropriately. So let me jump into the first part of this. So here are California's overtime requirements. We have daily overtime requirements in California as well as weekly overtime. So when we're looking at daily overtime requirements, employees need to be paid overtime when they work more than 8 hours, and that is work time, each workday. They also receive overtime if they're working more than 40 hours in the work week. And then if you have employees that end up working 7 consecutive days in the same work week, they're going to be owed overtime for the first 8 hours. So let me give you an example there. When you're looking at a work week, that is a 7-day period. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. But for example, your work week is Sunday through Saturday. If you have an employee that works Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they have worked 7 consecutive days in the same work week. So on that 7th day, the first 8 hours are automatically going to be overtime. Even if every other day they only worked 2 hours a day, say Sunday through Friday, they only worked 2 hours a day. So maybe they're only at 12 total hours worked. When they work on that 7th consecutive day in the same work week, the first 8 hours are automatically overtime. So that's why you really need to pay attention to work weeks. And we're going to talk about how important it is to define that. But you've got to remember that work week starts at the same point every week, and then it stops and it resets. So you want to really pay attention to when employees are working during that work week. Now, there's also double time in California. Double time is required when an employee works more than 12 hours in the same workday. And then again, on that 7th consecutive day worked in the same work week, anytime over 8 hours is automatically going to be overtime. So this is a good opportunity for you to take a look at your employees' time cards, take a look at your payroll system, and make sure that they are being paid appropriately, because you really have to pay attention to that overtime in California. So let's talk a little bit here about the work day and the work week. I've mentioned both of those terms before. Now, a lot of times, especially when we're doing handbooks, we do a lot of customized handbooks for businesses, and we will put in, what is your work day? And a lot of times employers will just put in Monday through Thursday, 8 to 4. That is your business hour, the business hours that you work. But your work day in the eyes of the state of California needs to be a 24-hour period that starts and stops at the same time each calendar day. So the presumption is midnight to 11:59 p.m. So that means at midnight every day, that's when the work day for your business starts, even though your business may not open until 8 a.m., but the work day started at 12 a.m. and then that work day ends at 11:59. So it resets every single day at midnight. So then that's the same idea with the work week. So a work week is 7 consecutive days. And again, it defaults to Sunday through Saturday, but that means every Sunday at midnight, the work week resets as well. So that's why you really want to pay attention to that overtime, because sometimes employers will say, okay, I had an employee who worked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So Sunday is their 7th consecutive day. I need to pay him overtime, right? Well, no, because we're looking at 2 different work weeks. If your work week is Sunday through Saturday, it resets on Sunday. So even though an employee might have worked 7 consecutive days, it's over 2 different work weeks. So that's why you really want to pay attention to that. And that's why it comes into play when you're looking at overtime, when you're looking at that workday, work week. You really want to make sure you're looking at when that work week and workday reset. Now, you can have a different work week if you would like to. If you want your work week to be Wednesday through Tuesday, you can absolutely do that. We, of course, advise that you put that into your handbook as one of your policies. Same thing, if you need to have a different work day, if you want your work day to start at 8 a.m. to 7:59 a.m. the next day, you can do that as well. But just make sure you define it and make sure you are consistent with it. All right, well, we have reached our midpoint. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Jessica can pop back on. Was there anything we needed to revisit or recover there, Jessica, before I turn it over to you?
No, I think just get a little bit of clarity from you. I think you had mentioned somewhere in there about buying mobile homes for.
Yeah. It's a new employer benefit. Everyone, you buy your employees a mobile home once a year, just once a year.
Just once a year. Okay.
Not a lot of people know about it. Very obscure law.
All right, very good. I will take it from here, Mary. And Mary,
you.
While I am chatting along, Mary will keep an eye on the Q&A box for everybody if you have questions as we are rolling along. So let's talk about regular rate of pay. And this is really important, as Mary was just telling us about overtime and properly paying employees. If you have employees who are making various rates of pay, we really need to understand what regular rate means. So what is the regular rate of pay and why does it matter for calculating overtime? Well, regular rate of pay is what the overtime rate must be paid at, and also missed meal and rest break penalties must be paid at the regular rate of pay. So Mary was telling us about minimum wage. So we have to pay all hourly non-exempt employees at least a minimum wage or more, but some folks pay commissions, pay non-discretionary bonuses, shift differentials, things like that. When you pay those additional rates, that impacts what that regular rate of pay will be. And that does involve some math, and we're not going to do that out loud right now, but just be aware, if you pay your hourly non-exempt employees an hourly wage plus additional earnings, when you pay them overtime, you really need to pay that overtime rate at the regular rate of pay, not the base hourly wage, as well as the premium pay that's owed for missed meal and rest breaks does need to be paid at that regular rate of pay. Now, if you only pay an hourly rate, you don't have bonuses, you don't have shift differentials, anything like that, then you don't have to worry about regular rate of pay. It only matters if you pay a base hourly wage plus other pay, where you're going to have to do that regular rate of pay calculation. So as Mary mentioned earlier, overtime either is at time and a half or double time. Anytime somebody's earning extra money, you're going to have to do this special calculation to make sure that the overtime rate is at that regular rate of pay, which is a little bit higher than the base hourly wage. Okay, so regular rate of pay, do we include bonuses when calculating the regular rate of pay? Well, the answer to that is going to be a hard maybe. So if the bonus is non-discretionary, meaning you as an employer have a policy of paying certain bonuses if something is going to happen. So if you do X, you're going to earn, $100 extra this week. If you do Y, we're going to give you 5 cents on every hour that you worked. When you do have that sort of policy, you are going to be required to use that bonus amount in determining the regular rate of pay. So discretionary bonuses are the bonuses where you say, if we have a good year, we're going to look at the budget and see if maybe we can give people a bonus. That's completely discretionary. You as the employer are going to decide whether or not that money gets paid. But if you do have a policy of promising a bonus if an employee accomplishes a certain task or goal, then you are going to have to do that calculation for your hourly non-exempt employees and come up with that regular rate of pay. So we talked about discretionary versus non-discretionary. Here's a little bit more detailed. So discretionary bonuses are solely under the discretion of the employer as to whether they're going to pay that to employees. We're not promising it. It may happen, it may not. It could happen regularly, it may not. It's completely up to the employer whether that bonus gets paid. However, if you do have incentivizing bonuses, such as, if we meet this certain goal, everybody's going to get, $50, then you are going to consider that a non-discretionary or a promised bonus. And always, always, always that non-discretionary bonus does need to be calculated with the regular rate of pay. This can get very complicated if these bonuses are done on a quarterly basis, for example, because if you have a non-discretionary bonus that's earned at the end of a quarter, you have to go back in time and come up with a regular rate of pay if the employee earned any overtime or missed meal breaks or missed rest break penalties in that quarter. So when you're coming up with non-discretionary bonus plans, make sure you talk to your payroll folks to come up with a good way to keep track of it and not miss any overtime that's going to be paid, to make sure it's paid properly with that regular rate of pay. Okay, overtime. Mary was telling us about overtime. Anytime somebody works over 8 hours a day, over 12 hours a day, the 7th day in the work week, we're going to be paying overtime to our hourly non-exempt employees. What if we have a policy that requires employees to get permission prior to working overtime, and we have an employee who decides to work overtime without getting that permission? What do we do about that? Anything? Do I have to pay that overtime even if it was unauthorized? And we're in California, so I think you're going to know the answer to this, which is yes. You must pay overtime even if it was unauthorized. So what do we do with that employee? Well, let's remind that employee of our policy. Give them a copy of the policy, maybe give them a verbal warning or just a coaching discussion. Hey, remember, we really do need pre-authorization before you work overtime. Here's our policy. Always ask employees to come to you if they need to correct their time card. You can consider discipline if it happens over and over again, but unfortunately, we're always going to have to pay for any time that an employee works, even if it's a violation of policy. So remind the employee of the violation of policy, pay him anyway, but also keep an eye on time cards. If you supervise hourly folks, if you have time to check the time cards daily, depending on how many employees you have, but at least weekly, check those time cards and see if people are taking their meal breaks or are working overtime without authorization, so you can kind of keep up with it and before the end of the time period, so you can make sure the time cards are accurate. So with overtime, work with your payroll provider, make sure that they are tracking the regular rate of pay if applicable, to make sure that all overtime is paid properly. And don't complicate it if you don't have to. We have some employers who have a base rate, they have an hourly non-discretionary bonus based on certain factors. They'll have weekly overtime or weekly bonuses, and then quarterly bonuses based on other factors. And it starts getting very, very complicated, and it's ripe for making mistakes when paying overtime when you have multiple rates of pay, because you really need to take in all of those rates of pay to come up with the regular rate. Sometimes just paying a little bit extra per hour may be an easier way to do that and limit your risk of missing properly paid overtime, because that can be an expensive mistake. You can always call us, as Mary will give you the number for your hotline again, but use your Alameda County Workforce Development Board hotline when you have questions like this. This is why we're here and why they provide this free, amazing benefit. Give us a call if you have overtime and multiple rates of pay and things like that. Our regular members, not hotline members, do have access to a bunch of fact sheets and forms. But again, please call that amazing hotline, because we are here to help you with some of these complicated issues. Okay, alternative work weeks. The reason why this comes after overtime is sometimes you have a work group in your organization that wants to work a different schedule. And if you work a different schedule, that's includes hours over 8 hours in a day, you're going to pay overtime for those. But if you have a properly implemented alternative work week, you may be able to avoid paying overtime if it's done properly. So if you, say, for example, have one work group that wants to work 4 days a week, 10 hours a day, and that work group all agrees that that's something they want to do, then you can avoid paying overtime for those 2 extra hours a day under an approved alternative work week schedule. So each wage order, and Mary talked to us about wage orders a little bit earlier, each wage order clearly defines what that alternative work week process is going to look like. And it's very, very strict on how you implement this alternative work week process, because you're getting out of your obligation to pay overtime. So you want to do it right. You got to propose a written schedule, hold at least one meeting, and provide a written disclosure at least 14 days prior to a vote to the work group. Now, work group can be your entire company. It could be all hourly non-exempt employees. It could be just the people who work in the warehouse. You just need to define what that group is, have a meeting with that group, provide a written disclosure of the written schedule and what alternative work week is. And then you hold a secret ballot election, and 2/3 of that specific work group must vote to adopt the alternative work week schedule. Once that vote is completed and 2/3 of the group agree to the schedule or schedules that you propose, you report your election results to the Department of Industrial Relations and the Department of Labor Statistics and Research through the Department of Industrial Relations. You wait 30 days at least before starting that alternative work week schedule. The reason why you need to do that is you need to make sure that you are listed as an approved provider of this alternative work week schedule through the Department of Labor Statistics and Research. And you can Google it, DLSR alternative work week. You go to that page, you type in the name of your company, and it should show that you're on that list before you implement that schedule. Then you implement your schedule, and the rest is history. We do have an alternative work weeks toolkit on our website for our members, but if you have questions about alternative work weeks, please do, again, use that hotline for extra assistance. Okay, let's talk about meal periods, rest breaks, and wage statements. These are all extremely important and where a lot of employers get in trouble pretty quickly. And it's easy to goof this up a little bit, but it's also easy to implement a program that works well that helps you avoid some of that extra liability. So the obligation to provide meal and rest breaks in California is extremely important for a number of reasons, and it's a highly litigated area in California. So here's some of the deal breakers with meal and rest breaks. If an employer fails to relieve employees of all duty, meaning we're going to interrupt your meal break, or we're going to ask you to hold on to your cell phone just in case, things like that, that's not going to be a compliant meal or rest break. The employee needs to be able to be free of all duty, and that means even just being prepared to answer that phone. Failing to relinquish control. If you're checking in on somebody, asking them questions, or you don't let them leave the premises, things like that, that is going to be a deal breaker, and that's going to be a violation of meal and rest break requirements. If you're not giving people a reasonable opportunity to take these breaks, meaning this work needs to get done, nobody leaves until we get it done, things like that, that's not going to be acceptable in California. Not allowing people, or you're discouraging them from taking those breaks. For example, wow, Judy's fantastic. She doesn't even have to take a meal break because she gets her work done. Things like that, where you're discouraging people from taking those breaks, that's not going to fly in California either. We really need to keep track of all of these things. Every time somebody takes a meal break, they need to log out or clock out. And then they need a full 30 minutes before they clock back in of no duty, no work, that's their free time. So those meal periods are unpaid. They need to clock out and clock back in. If you have hourly folks working remotely, make sure they're following and taking these compliant meal breaks. And while the rest period is paid, that's that 10-minute break, they don't clock in or out, but find a way to record that it's taken. Either in your timekeeping system, I was provided all of my required meal and rest breaks during this pay period. Even something as simple as that will help you track that these things are being taken. On top of the fact that you want to make sure if they aren't taken, you understand why, and that employees are reporting to their supervisor or somewhere else when they're not taking these meal and rest breaks and why. Okay, let's get into a little bit deeper. So meal breaks or lunches. It's important to remember, I was talking to a member the other day and the employee didn't take their break because she wasn't hungry. And let's remember, these breaks are not because of food. They're just a break. They're 30 minutes and you can walk around the block. You can do jump jacks in the parking lot. You can have a meal. You can do whatever you want in that 30 minutes, but it doesn't matter if you're not hungry, I guess is the point. You want to make sure employees are taking these required breaks and make sure your policy is clear about it as well. But the obligation to take a meal break is 30 minutes taken before the 5th hour. So 4 hours and 59 minutes into somebody's shift, that meal break must begin. And it has to be a full 30 minutes and fully relieved of all job duties. If somebody works less than 5 hours in a day, they do not need to take a meal break. Once they work over 5 hours and up to 10, they do need to take at least one 30-minute meal break. Once they work over 10 hours, they got to take a second meal break. Now, yes, you can waive a meal break if you're going to be done with less than 6 hours. So if somebody works 5 hours and 59 minutes, they can waive their meal break and not take a meal break. But once they get to 6 hours and 1 minute, that meal break needed to happen. So be careful with those waivers. If somebody doesn't get their meal break, if their meal break is late, then we as employers will owe that employee 1 hour of premium pay at their regular rate of pay. So when I was mentioning earlier that you want to track why isn't somebody getting their meal break, the reason being is that if you as the employer did not discourage, impede, stop them from taking that meal break, and the employee, like in my example where the person said, well, I didn't take my meal break because I wasn't hungry. Well, if you as the employer allowed them to take that meal break and there was no reason for them not to take that meal break and the employee blew it off, then you don't owe that premium pay. So it's really important to track when employees are missing those meal breaks and why. And if somebody chose to blow off their meal break because they weren't hungry, then you want to get that in writing from the employee. Advise them that it doesn't matter whether you're hungry or not. This is our policy and this is the law in California, and you need to take those meal breaks. So if you're blowing it off, we're not going to pay you premium pay. Okay, so here's an example. Somebody works 8 to 5. First hour, 8 to 8:59, and so forth. Their first meal break has to begin no later than 4 hours and 59 minutes into the shift. So 12:59, that person needs to be out the door. If you don't provide that meal break, you are going to owe that 1 hour of premium pay at the regular rate of pay. Sometimes we get the question of, well, we provide, like this picture, we brought pizza in for everybody. And so everybody sat around, they were chatting and they were eating pizza, and it was a nice little team building activity. Well, guess what? They still need to get that meal break, and it still needs to start by 4 hours and 59 minutes into their shift. If you want to do a team building activity and bring in food, that's wonderful, but the employees still need to be able to do their own thing for 30 minutes. So use caution if you're doing a company provided lunch, because you still need to provide that 30 minutes of uninterrupted break time for the employee, regardless of whether you provided the food. Okay, Are employers permitted to round meal periods, or does the meal period have to be a precise 30 minutes? I know you already know the answer to this. We can't round for meal periods. That meal period has to be at least 30 minutes. It can be more than 30 minutes, but it can't be less. And if you round, to the closest 5 minutes even, somebody's meal break may be 25 minutes instead of 30. So it's really, really important that you're not rounding those meal breaks, because employees need to get a full 30 minutes. And if they don't, you're going to owe that 1 hour of premium pay at their regular rate of pay. So make sure your timekeeping system or you are tracking when people are missing meal breaks or the meal break is too short, because you want to find out why that meal break was too short. Was it because the employee wasn't paying attention? Was it because the employee didn't feel like being on their break anymore? Or was it because your system rounded down or the supervisor interrupted the meal break? Those latter examples, you're going to owe that premium pay. Something else on rounding. Rounding is not recommended at this point. The way the law is moving in California, it's really moving against rounding. Years ago, there was this See's Candy case that said rounding is perfectly fine to the nearest 5 minutes, nearest 15 minutes, so long as the rounding policy is neutral on its face and it generally errs to the benefit to the employee, but it's applied consistently across the board. Well, fast forward 10 years from the See's Candy case, last year we had this Home Depot case. And what the Court of Appeals said in this case was this employer tracked employees' exact time, but then would go in and look at all the time and round it to the closest 10 minutes. And the Court of Appeals said, well, over time, the employees were getting underpaid. And so if you've heard of the de minimis rule, there's this Starbucks case. For many years, we've been talking about the Starbucks case. But what the Starbucks case said was, even if an employee works for 1 minute and the employer didn't pay them, the employer is going to owe them that money. So, because 1 minute over time in the Starbucks case ended up being about an hour and a half, and that's $20, right? So over time, that builds up. So the Home Depot case basically said the same things. Over time, this rounding rule was taking away de minimis amounts of money from all these employees. On top of the fact that Home Depot was actually tracking the exact time that the employees worked. So why go that extra step of rounding when you have the exact time? And a lot of us use, we use Paylocity at CEA, but most timekeeping systems these days do the exact time. So it's really, while we're waiting to see what happens with the Home Depot case, it's really not recommended that you have a rounding policy in general, but especially for your meal breaks. So take a look at your rounding practices if you have that within your timekeeping system, because we're moving away from that being acceptable based on this Court of Appeal case. Excuse me. So I mentioned earlier about meal breaks, but let's talk about those waivers again. So the first meal break, so if somebody needs 2 meal breaks, the first meal break can be waived if the employee and the employer agree, so long as they work no more than 6 hours on the day in question, or so long as they take their second meal break. So that second meal break, somebody works over 10 hours a day. One of the meal breaks can be waived so long as the first meal break was taken, or the employee works no more than 12 hours on the day in question. Once they get over 12 hours, going to have 2 meal breaks. Less than 12 hours, that second meal break can be waived. So if somebody works no more than 6 hours in a day, they can waive their meal break. If they work no more than 12, they can waive one of those meal breaks. All right, some of our takeaways. Consistency is key. So you need to provide meal breaks, give people the opportunity, not discourage or impede their ability to take them. You do want to be watching those time cards in your timekeeping system to make sure people are taking them. And if they are missing their meal breaks, or they're too short, or they start late, you want to find out why. Because if the employee is making the mistake and just not taking them or not being conscientious about it, then you don't have to pay that premium pay. Consistent enforcement is really, really important. So if over time people are just constantly missing their meal breaks and not getting premium pay, it's going to look to the labor commissioner's office that you're really not providing them or not following your policy. So you do want to make sure people are taking them and you're reminding people of policies and that you're talking to your supervisors and managers about making sure these things are happening on a consistent basis. So our rest breaks, those are the compensated breaks. They're 10 minutes. You must, again, authorize and permit that break. We like to see those, the labor commissioner likes to see those about in the middle of every work period. Again, they are compensated and they do need to be 10 minutes in a row. So full 10 minutes. And if you don't provide them, or you impede somebody's ability to take them, or you require them to stay on the premises during that 10-minute break, you are going to owe 1 hour of premium pay at their regular rate of pay. Okay, so the Department of Labor Standards Enforcement, that's our labor commissioner's office, says employers must relieve their employees of all duties and relinquish control over how employees spend their break time. And what that means is employees can do whatever they want in that 10 minutes. Double check your policies, make sure you don't have a policy that says employees must stay on the premises during their rest break, because that will not be a compliant rest break. So if somebody works 3.5 hours or less, they don't need a rest break. Once they're working more than that, up to 6 hours, they do need at least one 10-minute rest break. If they're working over 6 hours, up to 10 hours, they're going to need 2. Over 10, they're going to need 3. So 10-minute rest breaks, they can do whatever they want during that break time. Premium pay, again, 1 hour of premium pay is owed if an employee misses or is late or doesn't take a long enough meal break, and 1 hour of premium pay is owed if they don't get their rest break. It's a maximum of 2 hours a day. So if somebody misses all 3 of their rest breaks, it's still 1 hour of premium pay. Same with the meal breaks. If they miss both of their meal breaks, it's still just 1 hour of premium pay. So also keep in mind, if somebody works through their meal break, you have to pay them for that time. So if they're working, they're getting paid. And if they miss their meal break, an extra hour of pay is going to be owed. So premium pay obligations are triggered by Labor Code 226.7, subdivision C. And that's what requires the employer to pay the employee 1 additional hour of pay for each workday, the meal or rest period and heat recovery period for, companies that the heat recovery period is applicable. Anytime those are missed, 1 hour of pay is going to be owed. And that is at that regular rate of pay. So a lot of math again. So the labor commissioner, the Department of Industrial Relations, says that the employee may receive 1 premium pay hour for all insufficient meal periods per workday and 1 for all insufficient rest periods per workday. So like I said before, it's 1 hour total for missed meal, 1 hour total for missed rest, regardless of the number. Excuse me. Okay, very important question, premium pay. Is that 1 hour of premium pay considered wages? And the answer is yes. The reason why that's important, there's a couple of reasons. One is it must be shown on the wage statement, like that pay stub. There's got to be a line item for premium pay because that wage statement must include all applicable wages paid to the employee for that pay period. And premium pay is wages. If it's not on the wage statement, then your wage statement will be non-compliant, and there are penalties associated with not being compliant with wage statement requirements. The other reason why it's important as far as wages is concerned is all wages owed must be paid to an employee on their last day of employment. If premium pay is owed and it's not paid in a timely manner, like by their last day of employment, you could face waiting time penalties. And waiting time penalties are 1 day's wages up to 30 days. So it's really important that final pay and the wage statement are accurate, showing all wages owed. And make sure that that premium pay is paid at regular rate of pay, or you're not going to be compensating people properly. Okay, so wage statement requirements. Laundry list, everybody. Excuse me, laundry list. So wage statement requirements, Labor Code 226 is very, very specific. And this is what they call low-hanging fruit for plaintiffs' attorneys. If your wage statement is going to be wrong, they will start digging for more information. So these are all the things that must be on that wage statement. Gross wages earned, net wages earned, total hours worked, except for exempt employees, because it doesn't matter how many hours exempt employees work. For your non-exempt folks, hourly rates of pay, the number of hours worked, and each pay rate associated with each hour worked, any deductions, the dates of the payroll period, the employee's name, the employer's legal name and address, the last 4 digits of the employee's social security number or employee identification number. The paid sick leave balance should be on the wage statement or corresponding document. Piece rate employees need to have the number of piece rates owed. And for those of you who have 26 or more employees, that supplemental paid sick leave under COVID went away at the end of 2022. So starting January 1 of 2023, SPSL no longer needed to be on the wage statement, but prior to that, it did. That was required. So here's a sample document of what Labor Code 226 requires. So take a look at your pay stubs, work with your payroll provider to make sure all of these things are on there, because like I said, low-hanging fruit for plaintiffs' attorneys, and we don't like to make that easy for them. So take a look at your wage statements, make sure we've got all the information that needs to be on there, and you're providing compliant documents for your employees. Now, most people don't even look at their wage statements anymore because everything's direct deposit and online. But just be sure that if an employee wants to be able to get a copy of their wage statement, even though it's available online, that they're able to print it out at no cost to them. So if, at your office or at home, as long as they can print it out somewhere at no cost to them on the clock during work hours, then you're all set. All right, final pay, and let's close you out here. Final pay is extremely important. Now, we were just talking a little bit ago about waiting time penalties. So waiting time penalties is when final pay is late, and it's 1 day's wages for up to 30 days plus other penalties. So termination pay is so important for so many reasons, but it can be very expensive if you're late. So an involuntary termination, you're fired. The minute those words come out of your mouth, the money needs to be in the employee's hands. So if you're terminating somebody and they're a remote employee, you've got to find a way to make sure you're standing there, somebody is standing there handing them that final paycheck. Direct deposit is an option. However, you need a separate direct deposit authorization from an employee to have final pay direct deposited. So use caution, especially when you're terminating someone. If somebody quits with more than 72 hours notice, final pay is just owed on their last day. If somebody quits with less than 72 hours notice, pay is owed within 72 hours after notice is given. And 72 hours is clock hours, not business hours. So if you're closed on the weekends and somebody quits at 4 o'clock on Friday, 72 hours is sometime on Monday that money needs to be in their hands. The benefit with somebody who voluntarily quits, as opposed to somebody that you terminate. If somebody quits, you can mail that final pay. Highly recommend that you get written authorization from the employee to mail it and ask the employee to provide the address to which it must be mailed. I would not mail it otherwise. I wouldn't just assume. Always get that in writing, because that will protect you, because the date of mailing is considered the date of payment. So that way you can prove that you mailed it in a timely manner and that the paycheck was not late. Final pay should almost always be a live check. Again, if somebody says they're okay with direct deposit, make sure you get that in writing. So the final pay is paid at the employee's primary work location. So if you have a remote worker, make sure your remote worker agreement specifies what the primary work location is. Is it the employee's home, meaning you want to have their address in that remote worker agreement? Is the primary work location your headquarters or other location? Know where that is, because if you're terminating somebody, that's where the money needs to be handed to them. And if somebody quits, you can say your final pay is available at your primary work location, which is headquarters. So it's really important you know that. Final pay does need to include all wages, all accrued but unused vacation or PTO, any missed meal breaks, all earnings through the last hour of work. So make sure that everything is super accurate in those final pay so you can avoid those waiting time penalties and provide that to them in a timely manner. So commissions and expense reports are going to be a little different, because expenses are not wages. So you've got some flexibility. If your policy is we pay expenses on a monthly basis, that would still apply. And as far as final pay, you don't have to get them their expenses on their last day of employment necessarily. Sometimes people prefer to do that, but you have a little bit of flexibility. With commissions, commissions are wages, but they're not wages until the commissions are actually earned. So in California, if we pay anybody by any commissions, we need to have a written commission agreement. That written commission agreement should be very clear and specify when commissions are earned, because the minute they're earned, they are owed. So if you have folks who are on commission, their commissions do not need to be paid the same way final pay is provided, but they do need to be paid in the way that is dictated by the commission agreement. So if you do have commission employees, take a look at that commission agreement, make sure it's clear when commissions are earned, and also make it clear when commissions will be paid, especially final pay. So let's say you pay commissions quarterly, but final pay commissions will be paid within 1 month after termination. Take a look at what your commission agreements say and just make sure it's clear, and make sure you follow whatever your commission agreements say when somebody leaves your employment. So wage penalties. Employees can file an action with the Department of Labor Standards Enforcement. Again, that's our Labor Commissioner's office. And they can file a claim going back up to 3 years back. So if you think about that, like a missed meal break from 2022, 2021, 2020, you're going to go back. People can go back 3 whole years. So if you're not tracking hours and not paying things properly, it can add up very quickly. Those waiting time penalties will kick in if it's a terminated employee or somebody who quit and their wages were not accurate or fully paid. So for example, if there was a premium or there's a penalty pay for a missed meal break and it wasn't paid upon termination, and you didn't know about it or you missed it, you're going to owe that 30 days of waiting time penalties. There's going to be interest, and employees have up to 4 years to file a claim for unpaid wages from the date the wages were earned. So it's a long time and goes back a lot of years, and employees will track that and they keep track of that information. So when Mary was telling us earlier about the importance of making sure that exempt employees are truly exempt, meaning they meet the duties test and you're paying them at least the minimum salary, if you're wrong, that employee can go back 4 years. They can wait 4 years and then get 3 years of missed meal breaks and overtime and all of these things because you weren't tracking their hours because you had them misclassified as exempt. So it gets expensive very quickly. And if you're failing to pay the minimum wage, there's penalties per pay period and subsequent violations, $100 per pay period and $250 for subsequent violations. So these do kind of snowball a bit. That's why this is so important that you're paying attention, at least on a weekly or a pay period basis, if not more often, that people are being paid all of these things properly. Okay, so we do want to make sure employees are properly classified as exempt. If you're wrong, you may need to seek legal advice, or if you're coming up looking into next year, like Mary mentioned, and you're saying, you know what, I don't want to pay $65,000, $68,000, whatever it's going to be for 2024. I may need to start having conversations with exempt employees that we're going to bump you to hourly non-exempt because we won't be able to sustain that budgetarily moving forward. And it's a really good employee relations opportunity because exempt employees changing to non-exempt is a hard transition. It's really complicated and sometimes people take it personally. So you really want to handle that with care, but stay ahead of it. You don't want to be wrong about it. You also want to make sure you're right about independent contractors. If somebody's not truly an independent contractor, you want to get that fixed as soon as possible. Double check all of your policies, ensure consistent enforcement, make sure your managers are making sure that people are taking their meal and rest breaks, make sure managers are verifying that employees are requesting authorization for overtime. And don't forget about those remote workers. Remote workers, especially the hourly non-exempt folks, need to follow all these policies as well. So you want to make sure everybody is on board and consistently following all your policies. Take a look at those pay stubs, make sure you have everything on there that needs to be on there, and make sure final pay timing is accurate. So that's a good reminder of knowing who has the authority to terminate in your organization, because anybody who has the authority to terminate needs to make sure payroll is notified to make sure all that final pay is accurate and ready to go upon termination or separation. So really important that, you know, all hands on deck to make sure everybody knows what their authority is and make sure that nobody misses a step, especially with final pay and accurate pay, missed meal breaks, all of those things. All right, so if you need more assistance than that amazing hotline that the Alameda County Workforce Development Board provides you, feel free to take a look at some of our memberships starting at $99 a month. A lot of resources, toolkits, online harassment prevention training, posters, things like that, that are additional member benefits. Okay, for those of you who are continuing your HR credits, your continuing education credits, your HRCI code is 626715, and your SHRM code is 23 dash, please don't forget the dash, 9K2YW. So HRCI is 626715. Your SHRM code is 23 dash 9K2YW. And if you have time, please take a moment and fill out our survey. It helps us make sure you are getting the information you need from us, or you can just give us unabashed adoration. We'll take either positive, negative, inquisitive, whatever you got for us. We like to hear back from you. It's a QR code, so anybody who's been to a restaurant in the past 2 years, hover your little phone over there and fill that out. So Mary, did we miss any questions? Did we cover everything?
I am all caught up. Thanks everyone for the questions. I think we are good to go.
All right, back to you, Steph.
All right, I did see one question just pop in from an anonymous attendee. If you guys want to take a look at that one real quick, we can get that one question answered right before we hop off.
Even if the employee agrees in writing to receive final pay after the 72 hours, we should still follow the 72-hour rule. Absolutely. Yeah, the 72-hour rule or the minute you're fired comes out of your mouth are not waivable. You have no flexibility on that whatsoever.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you everybody for attending this webinar with us this morning. We know you got a lot of information. So if you have any questions, please just go ahead and give your hotline a call. We will be standing by Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, ready to help you out. Please go out and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.